Hey y'all, welcome or welcome back. Today I'll be sharing how to make this 3-in-1 top on your circular knitting machine. I've labeled this as an intermediate project since we'll be doing things like a long tail cast on, ribbing, decreasing, and I-cord. Don't be too intimidated though, because each panel of this top is made in exactly the same way, so it's really not too hard and shouldn't take you very long to complete. As I said, this top is made up of 4 identical panels that are all sewn together. It is constructed from bottom to top, starting with a cast on, going into some ribbing, a bit of knitting straight, then some decreases, and going into the I-cord. This is a very stretchy, easy to wear top that can easily be sized up or down and is perfect for warmer weather. And as the name suggests, this top can be worn in 3 different ways. First, we can go over the skills you'll need to have to be able to make this top. You'll need to know how to do both a regular cast on and a long tail cast on. You'll also need to know how to create ribbing, how to knit, and more specifically, how to knit a panel, how to decrease, how to create I-cord, how to cast off, and how to do mattress stitch. There are links to tutorials for every single one of these techniques in the description, so go ahead and check that out if you need help or if you just want a refresher. For this project, you'll need a 48-pin circular knitting machine. I'll be using a 48-pin Sentro today, but you can use an Addi or any other similar circular knitting machine. You'll also need at least 2 skeins of DK weight yarn in 2 different colors. I'm using Kobu yarn from Lion Brand in denim and steel blue, and I would really recommend this yarn for this project because it is super stretchy and has great drape, and it also is one of the few warm weather yarns that I know of that works well on circular knitting machines. The amount of yarn you'll need will vary depending on how long you want your top, but for most sizes and lengths, you'll just need the 2 skeins. You'll also need a crochet hook. Almost any size will work, but I'm using a 5mm hook. And then you'll need a loom pick, a darning needle, a tape measure, some scissors, and optionally some stitch markers. This tutorial includes instructions for sizes extra small small, medium large, extra large 2XL, and 3XL 4XL. I've put on the screen a chart showing the finished dimensions of each size, so go ahead and pause this video briefly so that you can determine which size you'd like to follow. All of the measurements are provided for all sizes except for the length measurement, but we'll go through the instructions step by step to determine the length you'd like for your top. On this diagram here, we'll be finding the measurement that is labeled with the letter D, which is why you don't see any measurements for it yet in the chart. I'll be making a size medium large in today's tutorial, but instructions for all sizes will be provided on the screen following this format: extra small small, medium large, extra large 2XL, and 3XL 4XL. And if there's only one number provided, then that number applies to all sizes. Our gauge is in a 4-inch or 10cm square. There should be 13 stitches by 17 rows. We'll be going through the steps later for how to create a gauge swatch, so if you don't know how, then don't worry, but you must create a gauge swatch because if you don't, your top will not be the right size in the end, and you won't be able to determine how many rows to knit to achieve your desired length. The last thing I wanted to mention before we get started is that there's a written PDF pattern for this tutorial available both on my Ko-Fi page and my Etsy shop for a small price. This just helps me to be able to continue making patterns and tutorials for y'all, so if you'd prefer to follow that or you'd just like to have it to supplement this video, then you can find the links in the description. It has all the written instructions for this top as well as a separate PDF that has written instructions for all of the more advanced techniques that we'll be using in today's tutorial. So with that, let's get started. First thing we need to do is make a gauge swatch. So you're going to take your main project yarn and you're going to cast on at least 20 stitches. And we can just do the regular, normal type of cast on right now. We don't need to do anything fancy. So once you're done casting on 20 stitches and you have your yarn through your tension guide, we're just going to knit until our little panel here is at least 4 inches long, which is probably around 25 rows, but you know, it might be more or less for you. So just about 4 inches. And we're just gonna knit just regular, just back and forth, back and forth. So once you've knit enough rows, then we're just gonna cast off like normal. So just take your yarn out of the yarn and tension guides and then release the stitches cut your yarn, leaving a long enough tail so that you can cast off. Take a darning needle and pick up your stitches. Then we can give it a little stretch. Now that it's off the machine, set our stitches in place, and now we're ready to wash this. So you're gonna wanna wash and dry your swatch in whatever way you plan to wash and dry your finished piece. So for me, that's just hand washing and laying flat to dry. And then once we do that, then we can come back and measure it. So I'm gonna go ahead and wash my gauge swatch. You do the same, and then we'll meet back here so that we can measure our gauge swatches. My gauge swatch has been washed and dried, so now I am ready to measure it. So what we're gonna do is take a ruler and we're gonna measure how many stitches and how many rows are in 4 inches or 10 centimeters. I'm gonna do 4 inches because I live in the US and so that's what I know, but if you wanna use centimeters, then go ahead. You're just gonna use 10 centimeters instead of 4 inches. So we're gonna measure first how many stitches we have in 4 inches. So just lay your ruler across your stitches of your gauge swatch and line up the very edge, of this first inch with the edge of the first stitch. And then just count how many stitches you have in these 4 inches. So the gauge that we're trying to match is in 4 inches or 10 centimeters squared. We want 13 stitches and 17 rows. So I'm gonna count and see if I have 13 stitches. And even if it's just close to that, that will be fine, especially if you're using this same yarn, because this yarn is pretty slinky, stretchy, movable, so it honestly can be hard to get the exact same measurement just because it's so movable, if that makes sense, this yarn is. So if it's pretty close to that gauge measurement, then you'll be fine. All right, so I have like 13.25 stitches in my 4 inches, so that's totally fine. That's very close, so that's good. Now we can do the rows. So it's basically the same thing. You're just gonna line up your ruler along a row instead of along the stitches. And again, line up the edge of this first inch with the very edge of this stitch, and then just count how many rows you have in these 4 inches. So we want to have about 17 rows in these 4 inches to match the gauge that we're trying to match. So I've got about 17 and a half rows in my 4 inches. For me, that means that my tension is about what I want it to be for this top. If yours is way off, then definitely redo your gauge swatch. You need to make sure that your gauge is as close as you possibly can get it to the gauge provided. Otherwise, your top is going to be totally the wrong size. So if you have way too many stitches or way too few, same if you have way too many rows or way too few, then just change the tension when you're making your next gauge swatch and try it again to get it as close as possible to the provided gauge. So mine is very close, so that's good for me. So I know that I can go ahead and make the size that I've chosen, which is the medium large, and my top is going to be basically the same size that I expect it to be. Now that your gauge matches as closely as possible to the gauge provided, we can determine the length of our top. So since the straps are adjustable, they are not going to be included in the length measurement for this top. the highest point on the front of your garment should be situated on your overbust, which is an inch or two below your collarbone. So first thing we're gonna do is grab our tape measure, and we're gonna measure from our overbust down to wherever we'd like our top to end. The sample is cropped, so it'll fall around the waistline, but you can make your top as long or short as you'd like. You could even make it into a dress if you want to. Then take that number, which is your total length measurement, and subtract this number from it. For example, I want the sample to be 12 inches long in total from overbust to the bottom hem, and I'm making a size medium large. So I need to take 12 inches minus 6.5 inches, which equals 5.5 inches. This number represents the measurement labeled D in the image on screen. It's the length of our top from the lowest point in the V-neck to the bottom hem. Now we'll determine how many rows we need to knit to equal that measurement you just found. And we'll be using one of the equations on screen to figure this number out. So if you're working in inches like me, then you'll use the equation that's in inches. And if you're working in centimeters, then you'll use the equation that's in centimeters. So for the sample, I need to take 4.25 rows per inch times 5.5 inches, which equals 23.375 rows. So that is the number of rows that I need to knit to equal that 5.5 inch measurement that I just found. And remember that that is the measurement that equals the letter D on that image that I just showed y'all. All right, now for the final step. We just need to round that number we just got to the nearest even number. So for example, I got 23.375 rows. Rounded to the nearest even number is 24 rows. And then write this number down somewhere because we will need it later in the pattern. So remember this number. Please write it down somewhere. All right, after all that, we're finally ready to get started on our top. So first things first, make sure your machine is in the tube setting. We'll be creating panels today, but since we'll be making I-cord at the end of every panel, it's just simpler to work our panel on the tube setting the entire time. That way we don't have to constantly switch back and forth between the different settings. So we're gonna start with our color B yarn, which for me is this darker blue color. And we're gonna start with a long tail cast on. So if you don't know how to do a long tail cast on, then I have a tutorial linked in the description. I will briefly be going over how to do a long tail cast on right now, but if you want, to go more in depth or you wanna see it a little bit slower, then I'd suggest you go check out that video. So we're gonna take our yarn and we're going to drape it across our needles about 2 times the number of needles that you plan to cast on. So I am doing the size medium large, so I'm going to cast on about 31 stitches. So I want to lay my yarn across my machine from, the beginning to the 31 stitch mark and then back. So I have my long length of yarn, and now I'm gonna make a slip knot. And this slip knot has to be kind of particular. So you made your slip knot, and now you're going to pull on your long tail of yarn, and that's what should close your slip knot. If your working yarn is what's closing your slip knot, then you did it wrong and you have to redo it. It has to be your long tail closing your slip knot. And that's because later, once we get our panel off the machine, we are going to tighten our cast on, so we need the long tail to be able to tighten our cast on versus our working yarn. So then when you have your slip knot, then just put it on your first needle, tighten it a little bit, and we're going to hold our yarn in the slingshot position. So you have your working yarn going over your left pointer finger, and then you're grabbing it with the rest of your fingers, and then your long tail is going around your thumb, and then again you're just holding it with your same fingers. Crank the handle of your machine. We're going to take our right hand, bring our pointer finger under this yarn that's around our thumb, grab the yarn in front of our pointer finger and bring it through. Now we have a little loop, and we'll put that loop on our next needle. Tighten it a little bit and reset our slingshot position on our left hand. And then we'll do the same thing on the next needle. and the next needle, and we're just gonna do that for however many stitches you need. So I need 31, and there should be on the screen the number of stitches that you need for your size. There's my last cast on stitch, so I'm just gonna put the remainder of my tail in the machine, and we don't need this color bee yarn anymore for this panel, so I'm gonna put that in the center of my machine, and I'm just gonna cut it away because I know I don't need it. I guess you could leave it on for now if you want, but I'm just gonna go ahead and cut that away and remove it. So now we're gonna switch to our color A yarn. So just put the tail in your machine and then put your yarn through your yarn and tension guides. And we're gonna knit 6 rows right now. Every size is gonna knit 6 rows. And for these first 6 rows, we wanna have tighter tension than we will for the rest of our project. So the tension that you need to use to achieve the same gauge, just do it a little bit tighter for these first 6 rows. We're gonna make these first 6 rows into ribbing, and I think it just looks a little nicer if the ribbing is a little bit tighter than the rest of the project. All right, there I finished my first 6 rows, and I think I forgot to mention this earlier, but your cast on does not count as a row. So you need to knit 6 rows, not including your cast on. So that's what I've done. So now as we are knitting our 7th row, we're gonna go in and do 1 by 1 ribbing on these first 6 rows. So you're gonna need your loom pick and your crochet hook right now. So make sure those are handy. And like I said earlier, for the remainder of this panel, we are gonna do our regular tension. We just needed to do the tight tension for these first 6 rows. So crank the handle of your machine until the second pin comes up. And as with all of these advanced techniques, I have tutorials linked in the description. So if you don't know how to do ribbing, then definitely go check out that video, but I will be going over it briefly right now. So we're gonna be doing 1 by 1 ribbing, which means we're gonna create ribbing on every other pin. So we're gonna skip the first pin and work on the second right now. So knit until your second pin just pops its head up, and then take your loom pick and take the stitch off of its needle. And then we want to grab our little cast on stitch right here to make sure that that won't come undone. So make sure you have a good hold on that, and then pick apart all of the stitches until you get to just this cast on stitch. So all of your color A stitches should be dropped right now. And then you're gonna grab your crochet hook and stick it in your cast on stitch so that that doesn't come undone. And then grab the strand of yarn that's above that stitch and bring it through the loop. And again, grab the next strand of yarn, bring it through the loop. Grab the next one, bring it through the loop, and we'll just continue doing that until we get to the top of our project. And then we'll put it on our needle. And there we've created our first row of ribbing. And then we will knit a little ways. We're going to skip this stitch and work on this stitch. Make sure that this column you were just working on, that stitch sinks down to the bottom of its pin. Sometimes when you're messing with your stitches, they can want to kind of pop up a bit. So just make sure that that's pressed all the way down, because otherwise your stitch might tuck or drop, and we don't want that. And then grab your loom pick and grab the stitch from its needle. Grab your cast on very well so that it won't come undone after we pick all of these stitches apart. Grab your crochet hook, put it in that loop that's left from your cast on, and grab each strand of yarn in order, bringing it through the loop that's on your hook. Then when you get to the top of your project, put the stitch back on its needle and just continue. So we're just gonna do that all across our project. So just one by one ribbing, skip a stitch, make ribbing, skip a stitch, make ribbing. Do that all across your panel. Okay, ribbing is done. So now what we need to do is take that number that you got earlier, you know, that one I told you to write down somewhere, and subtract 7 from it because we just finished knitting our 7th row. And that's the number of rows that you'll need to knit for this step. So for the sample, I got 24 rows earlier from my calculations. So I'll take 24 minus 7, which is 17. So for this sample, I need to knit 17 more rows right now. Now that you're done knitting that number of rows that you needed to knit, we're gonna start doing our decreases. And these are actually decently simple. We are just gonna do one decrease at the start of every single row until we just have 3 stitches left on our machine. So again, I will plug my tutorial for how to do decreases. It will be linked in the description. It's a little bit too much to go very deep into it right now, but I can do the first 2 with y'all. So we're gonna take our yarn out of the yarn intention guides, and we wanna take our loom pick and pop up the first needle and grab it with our loom pick, take it off of our needle and just hold it on your loom pick. Pop up the second needle, take the stitch off its needle, grab the third stitch off of its needle. So now you should have 3 stitches on your loom pick, and we're actually starting on the hardest side, which is the left side, because we have to pass our loom pick over to our left hand. And I'm going to grab this inner stitch off of the loom pick and just hold it with my right hand. And then I'm going to put this middle stitch on this first available needle. I know it's tricky with your left hand, or at least it is for me, but after you practice a few times, it gets easier. Then we're gonna put that stitch that we were holding with our right hand back onto the loom pick, pass it back to our right hand, and put that inner stitch on the same needle as that first stitch that we just put down. Put it right on top. And then this final stitch, the outer stitch, we're gonna put it on the next available needle. And there we go, push our stitches down, and we will bring our yarn back through the yarn and tension guides. And now we are ready to just knit across our project. All right, so that was our first decrease row done. So now again, when we start knitting back this other way, we're starting a new row, we are going to do another decrease at the beginning of that row. So take your yarn out of the yarn and tension guides, pop up the first needle, grab it with your loom pick, second needle, grab the second stitch, and then grab the third stitch from the third needle, and you should have 3 stitches on your loom pick. So now, again, it's going to be the same thing, just mirrored. So we don't have to pass our loom pick over to our left hand anymore because we're working on the right side. So grab the inner stitch with your fingers and then put the middle stitch on the first available needle. Grab that stitch again and put it on top of that same stitch, and then put our outermost stitch on the next available needle. Oop. Oop, sorry, I kind of lost it. There we go. And then kind of push those stitches down and bring it back through the yarn and tension guides, and there's our second decrease. So then we'll just knit back to the other side, and then when we start our new row, we'll do a decrease again, and then knit back, and then when we start our new row, do another decrease. And you're just gonna do that same thing until you have just 3 stitches left on your project. So I'm gonna go ahead and do all my decreases, and then we can meet back here when you have 3 stitches left on your machine or 3 stitches left at the top of your project. All right, I've just finished decreasing, so now I only have 3 stitches left on my machine, and after I made my final decrease at the beginning of this row, I knit the rest of the way over, so now my project is on the right side of my guide here, and this is where you should be right now too. If your project is still on the left side of your guide, then just knit across so that your project is on the right side now. So now we're gonna start the I-cord. If for some reason you didn't put your project in the tube setting earlier, you have to do so right now. Otherwise we won't be able to make our I-cord. So just make sure that your machine is in the tube setting right now. And again, I do have a tutorial for how to do I-cord, so if you need a more in-depth tutorial, then go watch that, but I will briefly show y'all how to do it right now. So take your yarn out of your yarn and tension guides, and I need to get it out from under this needle here because that's not one of my 3 stitches. We just want the 3 stitches on our machine, and our yarn, we're gonna hold it in our hand. Now we're going to crank our handle until we come all the way back to the beginning of our project, and then have our first needle pop up, and we're gonna bring our yarn around that first needle around the back, then to the front so it's under the hook, and then keep cranking the handle of your machine, and we're gonna knit these 3 stitches. And just kind of pull tight on your yarn too while you're doing this. Knit those 3 stitches, and then we're gonna do the same thing. Crank your machine all the way around until you come to the beginning of your project, and then wrap your yarn around the first needle, around the back of it, and then knit these 3 stitches. So that's how you make I-cord. So we're just gonna do that over and over and over again, and you can really do it for as many rows as you want. I am gonna do 50 rows. That's what I would recommend, but you could do more or less. It's pretty easy to tell how long your I-cord is while it's on the machine, especially after we kind of stretch our I-cord out, which I will show y'all in a little bit. It's pretty easy to see about how long it is. So you could do more or less. Just make sure that you have enough rows. Just make sure your I-cord is long enough that you'd be able to tie it to, the other I-cord that we're gonna make on our other panels later, so you'd be able to tie it over your shoulders. Okay, so I've done a few rows of I-cord, and I just wanted to show y'all what this kind of looks like before we pull it tight. So you see these stitches look kind of loose, and there are these just bars across the back of our I-cord. To get rid of that and to more accurately see how long your I-cord is, all you have to do is just pull on the I-cord, and the stitches, those bars become stitches. The stitches kind of set in place and even out. So that's how you'll see kind of how long your I-cord is currently. So I've done about 9 rows, and my I-cord is not nearly long enough, so I'm gonna just go ahead and finish out my 50 rows of I-cord. You can do however many you want, and then we'll come back and I will show y'all how we're going to cast off. All right, I just finished my I-cord. I did about 50 rows, so now we can cast off. So we're just gonna go around one more time, but we're not going to knit this. We're just gonna release the stitches there, and then we're gonna cut our yarn, leaving a long enough tail just to cast off these 3 stitches, so it doesn't need to be too long. And then take your darning needle And instead of, usually when we're casting off like a panel, we would start with this stitch because that's the stitch that still is attached to our working yarn. But we're going to go around to our first stitch first to like mimic the movement that we were doing throughout our I-cord. So go and pick up this first stitch first, and then the second stitch, and then the third stitch. And pull your yarn through and just pull it tight, and that will create a little knot, so your I-cord will be secure now. All right, so now that our panel is off the machine, we can go ahead and just stretch it all out to set our stitches in place. And now we can move over and I will show y'all how to tighten your cast on. Now that we have our first panel off the machine, we need to tighten our cast on edge. So you're gonna have to do this on every single panel. That just comes from doing a long tail cast on. When we do that on the Sentro or on any circular knitting machine, it leaves your cast on kind of stretched out. That's just how the Sentro works. So we have to go in and tighten all of these loose looking stitches all along the bottom of our panel. So to do that, we're gonna start on the edge that doesn't have this long tail coming out of it. We're gonna start on the edge that has the slip knot that we first started our cast on with. So you see all of these loose stitches along the bottom. We're gonna grab the first loose stitch. We're gonna pull on it just a little, just to tighten up this slip knot, and then move on to the next loose stitch and pull on that one to tighten up that first loose stitch. Move on to the third one, pull on that to tighten up this second loose stitch, and just go along the whole bottom of your panel and pull on each loose stitch to tighten the one before it. There's kind of some practice that comes with this of making sure your stitches are even, like that you're tightening them so that all the stitches look pretty even. You can go back in and kind of finesse them later, and it just comes with a little bit of patience and practice to get them really even. And you want to make sure that you're not tightening them way too much too. You don't need to tighten them, you don't need to pull on each stitch like super hard to tighten up the stitch a whole lot, because then there's not going to be a lot of stretch in your cast on. But you want to make sure that they all look nice and even and neat. And then when you come to the other side, just pull on this long tail and that will tighten up your last stitch. There we have it. Now we've tightened up our cast on edge and it looks nice and neat. So that is our first panel done. Now you're gonna do the exact same thing for your other 3 panels, but 2 of your panels you'll just do in the opposite colors. So you'll have 2 that are mostly color A with an accent of color B, and then 2 that are mostly color B with an accent of color A. So here I have all of my panels done. So here is my second panel that is exactly identical to my first one, colors and everything. And then I have 2 more panels that are the opposite colors, but other than that, they are exactly the same. So every size is gonna make 4 panels total, 2 in this color, 2 in this color, and then when you're done with that, come back and I will show y'all how we're gonna sew them all together. Okay, now that you're done with all 4 of your panels, it's time to seam them together. So I already seamed 2 of my panels together just because I wanted to show y'all what it's gonna look like. So we're gonna be using Mattress Stitch today to seam all of our panels together. And if you don't know how to do Mattress Stitch, then I have a tutorial linked in the description, so go watch that if you need some help. But we are just going to be seaming just the flat edge of every single panel together. We're not going to be seaming any of the edges that have decreases on them. So what I would recommend and what I like to do is I like to go in on all of my panels and put stitch markers at the end of the flat edge that I'm going to be seaming. So I have my 2 stitch markers here marking out where my flat edge ends on both my left panel here and my right panel along the edges that I will be seaming together right now. So I already seamed my 2 color B panels together, so now I'm gonna seam my 2 color A panels together so that we'll have 2 panels that we can then seam together. So we'll have 1 panel that's color B and 1 panel that's color A. And I have my stitch markers here, and I have lined up my 2 panels side by side with the hems lined up. I'm gonna grab my yarn for sewing and a darning needle and just start my mattress stitch. So we're gonna start at the very bottom of our left panel, and we are going to insert our darning needle from back to front just above our cast on row as far to the edge as you can work, and bring our yarn through. And then we're going to move to our right panel, and we are going to insert our darning needle from front to back this time, just above the very edge here, just above our cast on again. And we're just going to pick up this first bar. So pick that up with your darning needle and then bring your yarn through. And then we're going to go back to the other panel. So the whole time we're just going to be going back and forth, back and forth. And now we are going to insert our hook from front to back again and pick up these 2 bars that are just above where we had inserted our yarn at first when we first started our seaming method, our mattress stitch. We're going to pick up those 2 bars that are just above that and bring our yarn through. Now go back to the other side and pick up the 2 bars that are just above that first bar that we had picked up. Now go back to the left panel and pick up the next 2 bars. And go back to the right panel and we'll pick up the next 2 bars. Then go back to the left, pick up the next 2, go back to the right, pick up the next 2 until you get to the end of your flat edge, or if you put stitch markers in, then till you get to your stitch markers. All right, I made it to the end of my flat edges, back to my stitch markers. So now I wanted to show y'all what it looks like when we pull on the ends of our yarn that we use to sew. So just pull tightly on those, and you'll see our seam comes together, and you can kind of stretch it out a little bit, and it looks pretty invisible, and our ribbing even continues properly. So that's pretty cool, I think. So now you're going to seam your 2 color B panels together in the same way, and they should look something like this, like I showed y'all earlier. So you should have 2 panels, one that's panel A, one that's panel B, and now we can seam these together. All right, so you're going to take your 2 new panels and line up 2 of the edges that are unsewn. So we're going to be sewing a color A panel to a color B panel, and just line up the hems again the same way you've been doing. Take your darning needle and your yarn that you're going to use for sewing and just do the same thing. I've marked out where my flat edges end again, so I have that all ready to go, and I can start doing my mattress stitch. All right, I finished sewing these 2 sides together, so now I can pull on my yarn. So now we have another seam that looks pretty invisible. And I think I forgot to mention, but you will want to tie a little knot at the beginning and end of your mattress stitch, but I'm just gonna do that later when I'm weaving in all of my ends. But you can do that now or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure that you do that so that your seam is secured. So now we can move on to the final seam that we have to do. All right, so just fold that over on itself, fold that over on itself, and we have the 2 remaining sides that need to be seamed together next to each other. So now we're just gonna do the same thing that we've been doing, just do mattress stitch to join these 2 sides together, and your top will be all in one piece. Okay, I've finished sewing my final seam, so I'm going to tighten it up. And there we have it. I basically have my tank top made. So I'm gonna weave in my ends quickly, and then I'm gonna wash and dry my tank top in the same way that I did my gauge swatch, and I would definitely recommend you do the same thing. Your length measurement is going to be a lot different than how it is right now, because this yarn really likes to stretch out after it's been washed. So that's why we made our gauge swatch earlier, so that we know that. So if your top seems kind of short right now, that is to be expected, because that's just how this yarn is. So I'm gonna weave in my ends quickly, I'm gonna wash and dry my tank top, and I will meet y'all back here to see the finished result. And here is my top after it's been washed. This is such a fun and versatile top. I love how customizable it is, and it's always super exciting to me to make summery tops on the Sentro, since they seem to be such an anomaly. I hope that y'all enjoyed this tutorial. I can't wait to see what y'all make, so please share your finished pieces with me on Instagram or over on Discord. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and remember to go check out the written pattern over on Ko-Fi and Etsy. A special thank you to my channel members. Y'all are the absolute best, and I am so grateful for your support. If you'd like to become a member of the channel, you can click the join button or click on the link in the description. I hope you'll have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!